Kohen Gadol tzarich sheyeh gadol mikol echav hakohanim benoi. I have it. There's three different ways to vowelize this word. Is it noi with a silent aleph and the yud at the end, noi, or is it noi, or what do you have there? I have noi, right? Or is it just noi without even the aleph?
We have noi with an aleph.
But there's no chirik under the aleph. So you have noi with the silent aleph. Sometimes it's spelled just noi with a vav. And here I have it noi with no vav and a chirik, noi. And in Machon Mamre, there's a vav and an aleph and a yud. I don't know how you want to pronounce it because I'm not using the dotted Machon Mamre. I don't like using the dotted Machon Mamre, as we've spoken about this. I think some of the guys are asking, what do you think about this? And they've been sending proofs that perhaps it's supposed to be that way. Yeah, I would imagine that different traditions about how to vowelize Hebrew existed. Why? Because they reflect different forms of pronunciation. I just like to stick with Masoretic Hebrew. So I like it that, for example, in those participles that are present tense, masculine, singular, like ro'eh and oseh, the rule is when it's a silent hey at the end, it's vowelized with the segol. Normally the vowel is at serei, even when there's a silent aleph. My nafkamina is silent aleph and silent hey. Machon Mamre has it, a word like borei, with an aleph, is vowelized with the segol, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's no difference between koreh and koreh. Koreh with an aleph and koreh with a hey. They're supposed to be, at least, and maybe I'm exaggerating. Once again, serei isn't exactly a full American A, but it's different than a segol. So the point is, Machon Mamre, when they put in these dots, they're reflecting another tradition. And yes, it could very well be they have their basis. I'm just trying to stick with a standardized Masoretic system that, by the way, was standardized, more than 1,000 years ago. So we're just going to stick with that. I don't think it's worth. We don't know how to properly reconstruct a different mode of pronunciation from these things. Yes, if you want to, let's say, find the proper Babylonian pronunciation based on their old form of Likud, go ahead. But don't try to stick that into the Masoretic tradition. Don't forget, these Masoretes were working very hard on this. Eventually, they came to the conclusion, and we're going to stick with that. Ve'ein echad. Hold on, I skipped it again. He has to be greater than all his brethren in Noi. Too much of a Hebrew tangent there. B'cholach, strength. Be'osher, wealth. Osher with an ayin is wealth. B'chokhmah, wisdom. Uv mar'eh. Where's your says that the Kohen Gadol, who inherits, the son who inherits, should be, at least, if he doesn't have the Chachma, he should at least have the fear of heaven. Where's the fear of heaven here? Yeah, I guess all the Kohanim, they work in the Mikdash. They're taking their lives into their own hands. They have to have fear of heaven. In this case, he should be even better than everybody because it's a physical rule. All these things are physical. See this? Noi is his looks. Koach is his strength. Osher, that's certainly external to the man himself. Chachma, that's the only one that might be, one like an attribute that we could say a good midah the person should have. Uv mar'eh, also how well he looks. What's between noi and mar'eh? So they say yofi is in the face. Yifas toar, okay. For a woman, yofi is in the face. Fat mar'eh is the rest of the body. Okay, so it could be handsome. There's some handsome people who are funny, unusually short, let's say, or freakishly tall. He has to have a good look to him. Imein lo mamon, he doesn't have money. So they can enrich him. By the way, there's a story about how there was this Kohen who was fully qualified to won't be Kohen Gadol. They put him in the valley and they filled it with gold. Obviously, it's exaggeration, but the point is, this was an explicit case mentioned by Chazal that there was someone qualified, except he didn't have the riches, so they made him rich. Was it all Tanai? I don't know. How rich were Kohanim back in the day? Good question. The halacha over here is none of these things are actually critical. If the Kohen Gadol can be lacking any of these. This is for the commandment. It's proper that he be Gadol me'echav. Okay? So it says Gadol mikol echav. This is a biblical expression. So he's supposed to be greater than all of them, and that's the mitzvah. Technically speaking, the etzem gedula that he has to have greater than all of them is that he be Kohen Gadol. How do we say he's Gadol me'echav? He wears the garments, or he gets anointed. That's the gadlut. That's what we said. The anointing, the translation in Aramaic means the anointing the oil of greatness, revuta. Aval imnit rabah b'chol makom. See, the Rambam is now using the Aramaic word for the gadlut is the ribui. If he was made greater for whatever reason, nit rabah. And we said that how do you make the kohen gadol mit rabeh? How does it happen? Through the process of just dressing like a kohen gadol or being anointed. Okay, very good. The chayav kohen gadol linhog kavod ba'atzmo. He also has to treat himself more respectfully. He can't do what he used to do, just like the king. V'lo yakel atzmo im shar ha'am. He can't joke around, let's say, and be lightheaded with the rest of the people. He has to be aloof. In Hebrew, they have an expression from the army called merchak pikudi, which is pikud is command, and merchak is distancing. So there's rules against, let's say, officers fraternizing with their charges. You heard about this? The guy's going to get drafted. Okay. So merchak pikudi means, for example, that let's say the commanding officer cannot sit around and eat garinim with the soldiers during their break. I did not serve, so I don't know how this works, but there are klalim. Merchak pikudi in its various forms it's not the term the Rambam uses, but he describes it with the Talmid Chachamim, for example. A Talmid Chachamim in Hilchot Deot, Rambam says that he has to have certain standards and stay away from others, not to eat with them, etc. So too, the Kohen Gadol has to take this on, and to an extreme extent. V'lo yiroto al Rome. They should not see him unclothed. V'lo b'veit hakisei v'lo b'merchatz. Well, what's the hava mean? Anybody going to the Kohen Gadol's house? The answer is, it used to be no one had his own, well, barely anybody had a private toilet or a private bathhouse. The bathhouse was a public place that everybody had to attend. So they'd basically have a specific time where it's just the king or just the Kohen Gadol. And the Beit HaKisei also, it's very hard to make sure that this is, only them there. V'lo kishu mistaper, and neither when he is getting his haircut. These laws also apply similarly to a king. Shnemar ha-kohen hagadol me'echav, the kohen who is greater than his brothers. Milamed shnagim bo gedula yetera. We treat him with extra greatness. Ratzahu shir chatsu achirim imo harashup yado. If he lets other people into the bathhouse, so that's his permission. Whereas a king cannot do such thing. This is opposed to a king who has no right to waive the reverence due to him. Lo yikanes levera mishteh. He shouldn't go to a party. Well, he could actually go, but it means like he could wave hi. You go to the wedding and greet the chasna kal, but he's not going to sit down and eat with them. Velo lisudot shel rabim. No public meals. Afilu heim shel mitzvah, even if they are sudot mitzvah. What is a sudat mitzvah? A proper one, a wedding between a kohen and a bath kohen. So his own son is marrying another prominent kohen's daughter, so he's not supposed to sit down and have the meal with everybody. Okay. He doesn't go with the rabbim. He eats with his immediate family. He goes to the house of the Avel. Avel is not a party. They don't really eat. People don't sit down and have food. Although nowadays here in Israel, there are groups of people who the house of the Avel is full of food and they have parties. And then when they finish Shiva, they have a whole party. I don't get it. I was introduced to this by living here for so many years. Have you seen this?
No,
Non-Ashkenazim do this. Well,
Japan, they do it.
well, I don't know.
Take pictures.
Okay, Japan's Japan. I'm talking about Jews. So I remember the first time my brother and I showed up at the end of a shiva for someone, and it was basically a party. It was like a shloshim, whatever it was, but it wasn't a shloshim. It was like right at the end of shiva, and it was in the afternoon, which means they're getting up from shiva the next day, and they had a lot of food. And I've seen these things. I told my wife that whatever you do, when my time comes, God willing, far from now, you may not do that because I don't want you celebrating my death. Okay, don't make it into a party like these people do. I don't know why they do it, but the assumption in Chazal is that the house of Avel was not a party. They weren't eating, they weren't feasting, and it was a proper place for the Kohen Gadol to go to. Why would he go there? Of course, to comfort the mourners. He doesn't just go in a group with the other Kohanim. They actually have to be walking behind him to his right until they have a formation. They encircle him and they act respectfully to him. It says that Rav Maimon gives testimony that he knew Rav Maimon, the founder of Mosada Rav Kook and the first Sar Hadatot, signer of the Declaration of Independence. You know about Rav Maimon? Rav Yehuda Leib Maimon. Original name was Fishman. He took the name Maimon when he moved to Israel. So he had a lot of Kisvei Agra, Ksav Yad. He put out the Sifrei Hagra. And he says when he was growing up, there was an old man in town who had seen the Vilna Gaon. That was their connection. He says they described the man who was obviously, had a certain look to him, tall, handsome, an obvious great person, surrounded by Talmidim in a semicircle who would walk them. So that's how they treated the Gra, those who were close to him. So too, this is the way they're supposed to follow the Kohen Gadol. And it says also who was the one who had an entourage like this. And it describes, Chazal say it's not proper for any great man to go with at least two people accompanying him. It says Yishai was Baba Anashim, David's father. He was a prominent fellow and he was always surrounded. Sagan Mimatzao Beino Levein Ha'am. So there's two different Perushim. Are you holding the Makbili or the Korean? It's a Machlokes, Makbili and Korean. What does it mean, Mimatzao? Beino Levein Ha'am. So Mimatzao is from the word Emtza. So some say that it means that he stands between the Kohen Gadol and everybody else. He just stands in front of the Kohen Gadol. Some say it's to his right. He's to the right, and the Am is to the left, which means what? So he's basically the Kohen Gadol sandwiched between them. You go see, read your notes there. It says Haskan Mimino Ami Spolov and Imsa Kohen Gadol be'emtza. Okay, it makes the Sagan makes the Kohen Gadol be in the Emtza. Sagan's to his right, the people are to his left. But is the Kohen Gadol facing these people even? It's a little bit strange. And others say that no. You look in your notes, it says the Sagan is in between him and the Okay. I'll have to see what respect is, by the way. A lot of times, what was once respectful, like what's a sign of respect? We stand up. But that's explicit in the Torah. Sign of respect for the elderly and the scholarly is to actually stand up. But I'm sure, like you mentioned Japan, I'm sure there's acts of respect in Japan that for us are, what does that even mean? We don't understand what the gesture would do. And there are things perhaps, well, in Western societies, we stop being respectful of people. I'm sure there were other gestures in proper Western society that showed respect, but in other cultures would just be seen as strange, correct? What we used to do, show respect. Bowing the head just a little bit is not a Jewish thing. Jews, when they bow, especially even you could bow to a person when you need to, they bow before the king. What was it? It used to be like you do in the Mikdash. You get on your knees, bow, Almighty, my Lord King, Adoni Hamelech. They wouldn't just tip their head. Or here's the thing I heard that they do in England is a curtsy. Okay, when a lady meets the monarch, and this is a British thing. You ever see a proper curtsy being performed? Okay, look it up. A curtsy is saying that a man has to do some sort of bow, like 3 bows at the waist, a waist bow, and a lady is supposed to do a curtsy. And a curtsy is like hold the skirt, saying like to cross the legs a certain way and take a little bit of a dip. You ever heard about this? You could see them. So they teach people who have to be in formal things how to properly curtsy. That's not a Jewish thing. And would people have to do this? No. Okay, so things change, obviously. There's some things are not objective forms of, or objective displays of reverence, but they're subjective. So to each his own. But the Torah does assume that there's certain forms of objective display. Okay? For example, standing up is one of the most important ones, and the explicit one of the Torah. Next. Daskanu Meshuach Shavar Mimino. Who's to the right of the Kohen Gadol, or maybe it's to Mimino of the Sagan, right? Because the Sagan is already, according to this Perush, the Sagan is to the right of the Kohen Gadol, and to his right, Sagan Meshuach Shavar Mimino. Sorry, I got that wrong. The Sagan is to already the Kohen Gadol's right, but here now it says the Meshuach Shavar. If you have some sort of former Kohen Gadol, he also is to the Kohen Gadol's right. Rosh Beit Av Avelim V'chol Am Yispolo. The Rosh Beit Av and the Avelim are to his left. So the Rosh Beit Av, by the way, we saw last week, the Rosh Beit Av changes how often? It's a weekly thing. Okay, there's a Rosh Beit Av, and each Mishmar has its Rosh Mishmar, but a Rosh Mishmar changes every single day. V'omer la'Avelim tinu chamu. He tells the Avelim, you should be comforted. And they show their respect from these Avelim. How much can they respect him? The Kohen Gadol has shown up in their house. What are they? They're sitting on the floor. Their clothes are torn. And suddenly the second most honorable person in the Jewish nation shows up at their doorstep. So it's not exactly like they're going to wash their face, put on their nicest clothes to greet the Kohen Gadol, or even sit on a chair. So kefik kochan, it's not expected that they go all out to greet the Kohen Gadol. Mate lo mate, a close relative dies, one of the 7 close relatives, for whom normally a regular Kohen would have to contaminate himself and sit shiva. That's usually the same standard. Whoever the Kohen has to sit, for whom he has to sit shiva, that's for whom the Kohen has to contaminate himself. But the Kohen Gadol has no such commandment. He says in the Torah explicitly, he's not supposed to do that. He doesn't go to the funeral. This is a machlokas in the Mishneh, I think, in Sanhedrin. Remember, describes how he would follow the beer. So I'm saying, like, it goes around the corner and he comes, then he shows up. But the halacha here is no, he doesn't leave. If he's at the temple at the time of his relative's funeral, he doesn't leave the temple. Or if he's home, remember the Kohen Gadol goes home at night. They close the temple at sundown. In the winter, the Kohen Gadol's home at 5 p.m. Sometimes we do funerals in Jerusalem. Sometimes we do funerals at 8 o'clock at night. So they have a night funeral. The Kohen Gadol does not leave his house. And for Nichum Avelim, he's going to sit down. He's going to receive condolences. So they greet him in his house. No, Bishvil Havaya can. Okay. Yeah. Vehu Omeid Bashura. He could also stand in the Shura. Uskami Nov Rosh Beidov Mispolo. You guys have done Shura. What's the Shura? The Shura is, right, they do this right after the funeral. They have 2 rows of men standing opposite each other, and the Avelim are supposed to walk through the middle and receive their condolences. You guys done this before?
Yes.
Good, okay. So that it's a mitzvah. This is the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim. And it says when he walks through, the Rosh Beit Av is to his left, the Sagan is to his right. V'omrim lo anu kaparatacha. We are your atonement. What does anu kaparatacha mean? It also says a person's supposed to say when he refers to his recently deceased parents in the first year, not alayim shalom, or like the Rambam said about his father, zecher tzadik livracha. That's the way the Rambam would write it, by the way. Zatzal is the one who used this for his own appellation for his own father. During the first year, he's supposed to say, Hareani kaparat mishkavo. I'm the atonement for his, mishkavo is a nice word for his passing. It means he's now lying. He's now at rest. And that's a basic way of saying it should have been me. So the comforters are supposed to tell the Kohen Gadol himself. Normally, they say, Min hashamayim tiduchamu, amoko minachem eschem. But in this case, their comfort to the Kohen Gadol is, it should have been us. We would gladly have taken your relative's place. Okay. He tells them, you should be blessed from heaven. By the way, it's a good thing because a Kohen, his job is to bless the people. When they feed him the first meal for a mourner, there's a halacha that a mourner is his first meal after the funeral cannot come from his own food. Someone else has to feed him, a neighbor. It's a mitzvah of the neighbors to feed this mourner. So they give him his first meal. Kola amisubim al aretz. The people came to comfort the Kohen Gadol. They're the ones who are sitting on the floor, not the Kohen Gadol. V'hu meiseva al safsal, and he's on the bench, just like a regular person. It means that the couch-like thing on which they used to eat. So he doesn't sit on the floor. Everybody else sits on the floor. They do it for him. Interesting. Ve'no koreal meitho kishar kohanim. He doesn't rip his clothing like a regular Kohen. A regular Kohen hears about a relative dies. How do they do kriya? It's like at the top. He's supposed to expose his heart. By heart, they mean expose the chest. Shneimar uvgadav lo yifrom. He shouldn't let his clothing become ripped. V'im karal okay. So if he rips his clothing, he has to be lashed. That's an aver on his part. He has a commandment not to rip his clothes. Aval koreahu milamata keneged raglav. He could rip the hem if he wants to. He doesn't have to. Usually you can't really see that. If let's say you have a rip at the bottom of your pants, is that really noticeable? Only if you draw attention to it will they see it. Okay. By the way, they used to not wear pants. Pants are a new invention. It used to be they wore robes, right? Who invented pants? When did they do it? The Gauls? When did it become it's a very European form of dress. Correct. When did Jews adopt this? You should just know my Hasidic friend told me the proper dress. Some Hasidim didn't like the idea of pants because even for men, pants are immodest. For women, obviously, we can understand what's wrong with pants. What's wrong with pants? It basically outlines the place where the two legs come together. Proper Hasidim always wore long robes also. They wear a long coat. And it so happens that they're wearing under that coat, some Hasidic dress involves knickers and tights. You've seen people dress like this? There is a mila to that. Perhaps it's a more proper form of dress that's more authentically Jewish, at least classically Jewish, to wear a longer type of robe and not wear pants. Don't forget in the base of HaMikdash, that's the thing. The Kohanim wore robes. Asher lo tigaler vatachalafs, and they wore, of course, they had those shorts on. It's called the Michnasayim, but you couldn't see those from the outside. A Kohen proper Kohen wears a belt and basically a robe. Yeah, so even for women, I think that it's a good sarich iyun why we happen to wear jackets nowadays. I think none of us are wearing jackets even right now. We're all wearing pants and a shirt. Okay, good question. Sarich iyun. Uvayt yelo muchan b'mikdash. He should have a house. It doesn't mean a house like a domicile. It means an office, a specific room for him in the temple. Bayith is often in Chazal and Halacha, like I said, it doesn't mean a guy's house for living. It's just a room. Okay. Bayith sheish bo sefer Torah. It doesn't mean a house with the sefer Torah. It means a room with the sefer Torah. V'hi nikret lishkat kohen gadol. It's called the office or the bureau of the kohen gadol. He has this place where he holds court. And by the way, they also call it the lishkat palhadrin. And I think lishkat eitzim they mention in the notes. It has some names. That's where he should be. Uchvodo with ifarto sheyeh yoshev b'mikdash kol hayom. It is part of his glory and his honor to be not literally sitting, but in the temple all day. Okay, he holds court in the temple. Velo yetze elo veto bilvad. He should only leave the temple to go back to his house. I thought you said his house is in the temple. No, here's how you know. Beito in this case means his actual house. Where his family is. Balayla osha ushtaim bayom. Either at night or 1 or 2 hours in the day. Why would he go home in the middle of the day? To eat, to nap, or whatever it is. The Kohen Gadol is not a prisoner in the Beit HaMikdash, so it's proper that he have time to go home. And even then, his house should be in Jerusalem. He shouldn't leave the place. Really? He shouldn't go on vacation? Yeah. I think sometimes you have a privilege. I think the current Prince Charles, King Charles, when he was Prince of Wales, told the chief rabbi, Rav Sachs, please don't do that. He told Rav Sachs that being chief rabbi is like being Prince of Wales. It's more of a predicament than a privilege. Okay? Sometimes you don't say, I want to be Kohen Gadol. I want to be this. It comes with, there's a downside to it. Being Kohen Gadol isn't just for the honor. By the way, that's what they tried. That was the problem in Second Temple times. People went to the position because of all the perks, and they weren't willing to, take on the obligations. The Kohen Gadol done, he can serve as a judge. Sometimes he can be part of the Sanhedrin. V'daninoto, and he could also be brought up on charges. He could be sued privately. Remember, someone could have a lawsuit against him. That's a civil suit, or a criminal suit, or even an avera suit. Okay, whatever it is. The others say we saw the Kohen Gadol chas v'shalom. Once again, we saw he eating non-kosher, for which he should be less. The example before. So they would bring him to court. Umidin alav, and they could testify against him. This is in distinction to who? The king. It says Davidian kings, they are meant to be judges, so they can also be judged against. But eventually they came with Takana, said Malchei Yisrael. That means kings from other tribes should not be put on trial. Apparently this is from the Herodian times, later Maccabean times, Herodian times. Why? Because those kings were obviously not Davidians, and eventually they all went the Sadducee way. That was the end of the Hasmoneans, and then the Herodians, Bekoshi they were from. You couldn't really find it. There was one good Herodian king, Agrippus I. So he was decent. So Chazal said the problem with Herod, for example, they wanted to, even before he became king, they wanted to put him on trial. And I think it was only Shammai who stood up to him. And that was before Hillel even showed up. And the problem was, they said, if we let these kings, they're not fit to judge, and they're certainly not fit to be put on trial, because then we're going to get ourselves killed. So they just, immunity. They shouldn't serve as judges, and they shouldn't have any, just ignore any crimes they may commit. and that works out. So that's a takana. So it says Malchi Yisrael don't get this, and it's a little bit of a problem. You should just know it used to be the assumption was in, let's say, biblical times that a king can act as a judge instead of going to the judge. He used the court of appeals. Says a few times King David had people appeal to him. King Solomon, of course, judged, and even some Ahab and his children served as judges. People appealed to them for justice, and they were able to do such a thing because that was assumed. And I think even in proper Arab societies, the local sheik or whoever, depending on wherever has his time where the people could come in front of him, whoever has a grievance or whatever and can appeal to him, can have his case heard. And I think this exists also in places in Europe, technically speaking. Once again, the British monarchy, I heard, has this type of rule that technically speaking, the king can be take on any appeal that he wants. He doesn't exercise his prerogative ever because they have a constitution now and they don't do this, but that was something they used to do. Okay. Vein dani noto dinin fashot el beveit din agadol bilvad. At the end of the last paragraph, we said a Kohen Gadol who's done an Aveira, he's tried by a court of three and given lashes. If it's a capital case, he's accused of murder. He's accused of Chil Shabbos or homosexuality, like the real bad Aveiras, So he would only be tried in the Sanhedrin. Shneimar kol hadavar gadol yaviu elecha. Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Jethro, any great matter should be brought directly to you. Davar gadol. This is the Kohenu's gadol, so Chazal made the connection. It says in the Gemara, because it involves the Kohen gadol, this is a davar gadol, so it should be brought up to Sanhedrin. Haya yodeh edut.
Wait, what's the
Well,
Hamina that he would be brought to Sanhedrin?
No,
Of 71.
you don't need a Sanhedrin of 71 to try a normal capital case. What? A capital case requires a court of 23. Anytime you accuse someone of Chil Shabbos or homosexuality, that has to go to a court of 23. So a capital case, you would have thought that Kohen Gadol could be brought to a court of 23. Kamash Milan, it has to be a court of 71. The Sanhedrin has to try him. Okay, that's the Chiddush here.
Oh boy. That's literally first Mishneh.
You got a review? Okay. You guys are chavrusas? You guys chavrusa?
Yeah.
I don't even know this guy. Okay, good. Next. Haya yodeh edut. He knows, he has testimony. He can testify on someone else's behalf. Eino chayav laha'idah. He does not have to go and testify. Normally, a regular person does. That's a mitzvah. Person, I know edus for you. I can't avoid testifying. I have a mitzvah. Even if it's a case that's before the Sanhedrin itself, the Kohen Gadol does not have to testify. It's against. It impinges on his respect. His authority is that he doesn't have to go. If it's testimony for a case that benefits the king of Israel, Rambam makes a very close distinction. King of Israel is any king of Israel. Rambam recognizes there's kings of Israel and Davidian kings. Davidian kings, of course, are kings of Israel. So he would testify for him. So one case, the Kohen Gadol testifies if the king calls him to testify. We said in the fifth book, the Rambam's counting his books. What's the fifth book? That's Sefer Kedusha, which has forbidden relations in it. So he says the laws of forbidden relations. The Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an almanah. By the way, the Kohen Gadol, he could have married an almanah when he was an ordinary Kohen. He does not have to divorce his wife when he's appointed the kahuna and say, well, at the time that he married her, she was a widow. Okay, it means that if he's going to get a new wife after taking office, she cannot be a widow. Umitzuveh al betula. Once again, dafka, a virgin. A regular Kohen has no such requirement, for whatever reason. And if, once again, the Kohen Gadol had taken her as a wife before he had been Kohen Gadol, he doesn't have this. But he does have a specific commandment if, for whatever reason, he's single when he's appointed, which would be odd, or more likely he is to be married when he is in office, then she has to have the standard. He shouldn't have two wives. This is an explicit sugya there in Yoma. It says v'chi perba dov ad beito, beito zo ishto. So he could just have one. And there's the whole thing with Rabbi Yehuda there. How does he work that out? Does he need a backup wife? And there's a whole discussion about should they divorce one al tanai, etc. It's a very interesting Gemara there. At least I found it interesting. But they point out this is a little bit tricky because we have a very clear biblical example of a Kohen Gadol who it says had two wives. Who's the Kohen Gadol? It says specifically he had two wives. It says that about Yehoyada Kohen. It says in Divrei HaYomim, why you saw lo Yehoyada Nashim Shtayim. Yehoyada, who is the Kohen Gadol who saved Yehoash, once again the child king we mentioned, took the throne at the age of 6, I think, because that's when Yehoyada put him there. He was the only survivor of the coup of Athaliah, who we mentioned 3 weeks ago. Well, I think Yoshiyahu was 8. Okay, Yoash was 6. Someone correct me. Check the Book of Kings. So Yoash was
7.
7. Oh, wait, hold on.
Actually,
Are you in Divrei Yamim or are you looking at Sefer Melachim?
ספר מלכים.
7 years old?
בן 7 שנים יואש במלכו.
Okay, 7. There it goes. Okay. Thank you, anonymous voice on the computer. So I know, hi Yoni, you're not anonymous. Anyways, so Yoash at the age of 7 took the throne. Yoyada basically supported him the entire time. It says Yoash was on the derech as long as Yoyada was alive. In Divrei Yamim mentions Yehoyada's death. It says he married 2 wives, had many children, and then he passed away at the age of 130. Very happy, a good ripe old age, and they buried him in the sepulchres of the kings of David because the Davidic kings, because he had done so much good for them. So it says that he had 2 wives. Hi, Mai. How did this happen? How does this work with the halacha here? So a basic answer is that he had 2 wives over the course of his life. The point that I mentioned this is that he married later in life. He lived to be 130. In those days, it's remarkable that a Moshe Rabbeinu lived to be 120. We don't have anybody that late in the biblical period who it's explicit that he lived so long. And the point is that he had many children. Why? Because Yehoash later is going to totally forget the fact that he owes them this big favor, that Yehoyada basically saved his life and put him back on the throne and taught him how to be king. And he didn't show this proper gratitude. He actually had his son assassinated. So that's why it's mentioning this. So apparently Yehoyada had his wives, this was a halacha at the time, he had his wives at different times of his life. That's what it's trying to emphasize. Okay. So a Kohen Gadol is not supposed to have 2 wives. The Ravad has something in Isurei Bia about this. He's wondering, he says that technically speaking, only on Yom Kippur he's not supposed to have 2 wives. But during the rest of the year, perhaps, he's allowed to have multiple wives. He just has to make sure to divorce them before Yom Kippur comes around. That would seem to be the case. And we're going to see here that maybe it was, hold on. You know that there's a wild Gemara out there about who was the Amoraim who, when they went somewhere, said, who wants to be my wife just for a little bit? You know about this. Temporary marriages. For whatever reason, there's one who said that it was just to have a pas basalo status so that, let's say, the Gentile kings wouldn't offer them as part of their hospitality here, have some extra hospitality in your room where you're staying. That's the end of Gemara Avodah Zarah mentions this. Yeah. So is there protection, basically? So you say, I'm sorry, I'm married. But the point is that a Kohen Gadol, for whatever reason, it might have been a privilege for a woman to say that she had been engaged. Remember, just giving her the Kesef Kiddushin is an act, and then they could break it off for whatever reason. So she could say that she's a formerly engaged to the Kohen Gadol, or some other reason. Either way, the fact is that he would officially divorce them beforehand. That's what seems to be an implication. That not that the Kohen Gadol can't have multiple wives all the time, but just on Yom Kippur. There's many cases. Learning, Seder Nashim nowadays, you get to Yavamis and Ksubis, you have all these wild ideas. To us, they sound, well, I said wild only because we're not familiar with this. Certain arrangements that on temporary seem mostly on paper. They used to talk about engagements and weddings that happened on paper, and then they're broken off, right? And miyun and things like this. These existed back in the day. Or girls, their marriage was arranged already when they were like 8 years old. Of course, the marriage wasn't consummated until much later, but you see that these types of things were happening. So it's not so radical to find that a Kohen Gadol, let's say, for whatever reason, when it becomes Kohen Gadol, has a wife and an engagement in the pipeline, even though he's not actually going to be marrying her. So he would divorce one of them, either according to the Rambam when he gets this appointment, or according to the Ravad before he has to serve in the temple for whatever reason. Okay, I think the bottom line is things were different back then, and we do not understand societally how it worked. So we'll just say that apparently that was normal, and there's something that we're missing here. Next, it says here, v'choletz, okay, and he can perform chalitza. What is chalitza? If God forbid his brother died without children and was married, so he performs the chalitza service to his sister-in-law. V'chotzin lishto, and if he's the one who dies, then his wife receives chalitza. Umiyabim et ishto. He can even perform yibun on his wife. This is in distinction to a king. A king does not do chalitza, and no one does chalitza to his wife because no one's going to be marrying his widow anyways, and no one's going to be doing yibum to his wife. Why? Because a woman who was the king's wife is not to be sleeping with any other man ever. Okay, that's the standard we have in Judaism. Vim geresh isha. Let's say he divorced his wife. Mutarat li nasei li sharham. She can be married to some other man afterwards. Once again, in distinction to the wife, former wife of a king. If King David or whoever would have divorced the wife, so no one else would be allowed to marry them. Although Chazal do mention that perhaps a later king can marry them. An unrelated man who takes the throne can marry the previous king's widows. When did they say this was? The day in the Gemara says it was King David himself. Neshei Adonecha natati b'cheikecha. The prophet Nathan rebuked David, said, "I even gave you your own master's former wives in your bosom." Okay, you were allowed to marry Saul's widows apparently. And others say no, it means that he was able to marry into his family. That is, David, who was his first wife and main wife, was a daughter of King Saul. So that was part of his privilege. I think it even helped David's claim to the throne. I'm the son-in-law. I'm not some stranger to this. I'm the family. I'm the most qualified for the job. Okay. I wanted to see what the Sanhedrin is going to decide with the Kohen Gadol and the king eventually, what standards will hold. Don't forget, a lot of these halachot were derived from the sages, perhaps later in history. They're Torah Sheba'al Peh, Midot Torah Nidreshet Bahem. Perhaps sometimes they weren't followed. There's certain generations where they had yet to expound these halachot. Okay. Bisman shekohen gadol nichnas lechalish tahavot. When is this as part of the temple service? We're going to see this in Tamidim and Musafim. There's a certain point in the daily service where the Kohen Gadol just walks into the Kodesh, the room where the main room of the temple where the menorah is, and the other kelim, and he bows down, flat on his face. Shlosha ochazimbo. 3 hold on to him and they accompany him. Echad bimino ve'echad bismilo. One is right hand, one with his left hand. Ve'echad ba'avanim tovot shel ephod me'acharav. The way the ephod was that it had 2 gemstones on the back, on the straps over here, where the front met the back. Okay, there was a strap there. So they hold on to that. He goes into the heichal and he bows down there. Once the Sagan hears the sound of the Kohen Gadol's feet that he's leaving, why would the Kohen Gadol's feet make so much noise? He's barefoot. Large marble floors. They could hear the Kohen Gadol's feet. How do they hear the Kohen Gadol? He's got bells. He's got pomegranates and bells. He makes a lot of noise when he goes. Minishma kolo bevuol kodesh. She'll hear the sound when he goes into the Kodesh. And by the way, it's not talking about in Yom Kippur where he's wearing Big Day Lavan, because the Big Day Lavan don't have these bells. Okay, the bells were specifically on his me'il. The me'il is the big techeles robe that the Kohen Gadol would wear. So he had bells, so they hear him. Magbielo at a parochet. He lifts up the parochet, not the parochet that separates between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim, but the parochet that opened the main curtain that's in the doorway of the temple. Okay, a formal parochet. Like we're going to read in Tamidim Musafim, eventually all the Kohanim have the privilege also to enter the sanctuary and also bow down after the Kohen Gadol. And that was considered part of the service, by the way. It's a very thing that those who go to pray in the temple even today, it's very proper that at the conclusion of their prayers, they should also bow down somewhere. I do not think it's you're accomplishing much. Where do people bow down? Right beyond the Temple Mount, right at the edge, outside the Temple Mount, beyond that gate, where it's not Temple Mount anymore, and that's where they bow down. But that's like bowing down anywhere else in Jerusalem. They have to then cover the floor, and yeah, it's bowing down, but it's in the right direction, and you could actually see the temple, but still not Ishtachavu Lashem Bahar Kodesh. They have not accomplished the bowing down on Har HaKodesh, which is why I think many of us, I think that, remember we saw someone who was detained by the police for bowing down just over the line. I think he was mistaken, whatever, but he was there like, well, you're bow down here. It's like, what's the difference? Okay, so it's better to bow down if you can on the actual Temple Mount, but unfortunately, like I said earlier, so pushing the envelope too much, they might get offended. Is it worth it, for example, if someone knew that just bowing down in prayer on the Temple Mount would get one kicked out of the Temple Mount for the foreseeable future? Is it worth it? Is it worth being able to go there and daven every day? Or what's, I don't know. Or being able to do it right? Good question. Tzarich Iyun. Let's see the next one. Any day he wants to offer the Ketoreth, he can offer the Ketoreth. That's his decision. Why is this important? Well, we see the halacha is Chadashim LaKetoret. It says in Yoma, I think, that talks a lot of things that we know about how the Talmud was offered is in Yoma, by the way. Okay, the first two prakim just describe the daily service in the temple. So it says that they wanted to give every Kohen the chance to give Ketoret. Doesn't mean that that's it. You only get to do it once in your life because let's say you're there on service and there is no new guy. So you could bring Ketoret again. But the Kohen Gadol can basically bypass this procedure and say, I'm offering the Ketoret today. We're not going to look for a new guy. Why do they want to give every Kohen at least a chance once in his life to bring the Ketoret? Because they said it was a segula for riches, an actual segula, not one of the kind that you hear about today, like everything's a segula. This is an actual thing that bringing the Torah would earn someone the merit to be given riches by God. Okay. He could take first dibs on all the Kochei HaMikdash. It says, I'm going to do this part of the service. Ketzad, how does it work? Omer, Zoa Chatat Shali, V'zeh Hasham Shali. Says, I'm going to take care of this service of this sin offering or this guilt offering. Remember, we said that it involves a few things. It means that there's the offering it, there's the skin, there's the getting to eat it. So Kohen Gadol could basically say, mine, I'm doing this. Of course, he's a human, so even if he said, I want to eat this meat, there's a limit to how much he could actually take for himself, Ve'eno oved b'fayis, or I think it's over. I see a girsa that says that it's the reish. Either way, it means the same thing. He doesn't have to participate in the lottery. How'd that work? They stick out their thumbs. They see who gets to have which part of the service. They decide who does what. Remember? Each one coins one thumb or two thumbs, whatever it is, and they have the magic number that they already picked beforehand, and the one who has to count basically does the 21st finger rule. You remember this? Okay. It's also in Yoma. That's called the pious, determining who gets to do what part of the service in the morning, assuming there's not enough services to go around with all the Kohanim. Of course, we saw like last week, it is technically possible that in a given day that there's not enough Kohanim to do the service. But assuming there's more than enough Kohanim to go around, we're going to have to divide up the service somehow, so they have this pious. Pious is a form of lottery. Whenever he wants to offer something, so he's the one who does it. He just says, skip the pious, I'm doing this. With regards to Kochei Agvul, he's like any other Kohen. What's Kochei Agvul? The other gifts that Jews have to give Kohanim. The first shearings, Truma, Challah, the Zerah L'chaim and the Keva, the priestly parts of the meat. When a person has a slaughterhouse, assuming it's owned by Jews, right? No Kohanim, no Gentiles own part of the slaughterhouse. Every time they slaughter a bull, they have to give parts of the meat to the Kohen. So the Kohen Gadol takes no precedence there, not in the slaughterhouse. It's only what's in the temple. Bisman sheratzeh Kohen Gadol akriv haya ole bakevesh lasagan mimino. He wants to offer stuff on the mizbeach. So he's going to take parts of the offered animal. Literally has to be thrown. Remember, we saw there's a gap between the altar and between the ramp going up to the altar. Even though in the drawings we sit there right next to each other, there has to be a little bit of a gap. They're not the same item. They're different structures, and there has to be a gap so that the Kohanim can accomplish this act of zrika. Just like the blood has to be thrown, so too they can't just put let's say this piece of sacrificial meat directly on the fire. They have to sort of throw it. So he's going to do this. So he's going up the kevesh. The sagan is on his right side. He never goes alone. He kevesh. He gets up to halfway up the ramp. The sagan holds his right hand and helps him up. Let's say the Kohen Gadol is only he's a 40-year-old man. He doesn't need help walking. Still, it's an act of respect. And then the Kohen, who's, let's say, carrying the head of the burnt offering, every burnt offering, every animal offered as burnt offering has a head, right? And it says there's certain parts. And they do the olah, there's a certain number of parts. One Kohen carries this arm and this leg and this side, this head, etc., the entrails. So the one who holds the head is walking with the Kohen Gadol, and he gives it to him. Ha'evarim shebiyado. He gives the pieces that are in his hands, gives to him. The somech alehem v'zorkan la'esh. The Kohen Gadol does smicha on them. Instead of there's smicha that Kohanim do before the slaughter, correct? And then there's a smicha that he does on these pieces of the korban. So someone's holding on to the korban form so he could press down on it with his hands. What's the point of smicha? What's supposed to be done? By the way, we're going to see this also in Maser Korbanot. No, smicha. What's the point of smicha? Let's say you get to bring your own sacrifice. You are going to do smicha on your burnt offering. Huh? Okay, but what does Chazal understood it means? It's the point where, it's the point of vidui. Just like on Yom Kippur, it says the Kohen Gadol actually does a form of confession when he does the smicha. So too, anytime a person brings a korban, the Rambam's going to write that if it's a chatat and a asham, so that's when the offerer offers his confession. He's about to slaughter this burnt, not a burnt, it's this, like I said, a chatat. It's a sin offering. So he's going to rest his hands, b'kol chocho, on this animal's head and lean on it, and he's going to confess. And if it's a todah, he's going to offer words of thanksgiving. And if it's olah, he's going to offer his prayer, whatever it is. So too, the Kohen Gadol, apparently, he has this opportunity now to do a smicha on this particular piece of the animal, even after it's been dissected. Okay? What's called nituach. The modern Hebrew word for surgery is also the verb that's used in the halacha for taking apart the animal as part of sacrifice. Okay. So mechalehen v'zorkan la'esh. He leans on them and then he throws them. Literally, he has to throw them. It doesn't have to be an overhand throw. Although some pictures you see that we saw in the Machon HaMikdash shows an overhand throw, and other more gentle ones shows an underhand throw. Okay. That's how they hand him the rest of the pieces of the korban. Kol echad ve'echad notein avrim shebiyado l'rishon. Each one hands what he has over to the next guy, to the guy in front. V'rishon notein l'kohen gadol. The one at the head of the line gives it to the kohen gadol. V'hu somech v'zorech la'esh. He leans his hand on this piece of the korban, and then he throws it into the fire. The Kohen Gadol says, I just want to do smicha on every piece, but I'll leave it to the other Kohen to throw into the fire. That's also his prerogative. Okay? The only person who does smicha on evarim, different pieces of the animal, once the animal's already been taken apart, that's only Kohen Gadol. That's part of his honor, okay? Part of his privilege. Every other smicha is on an animal that's still alive. That's done before the slaughter. Okay. Kishe Yagdila Kohen. Now let's go back to the Rambam's now going done with at least the Kohen Gadol for now. Regular Kohanim. A Kohen grows up. V'ye aseh ish. He becomes a man. When does a person become a man? 13. Harei hu kasher la'avodah. He's now fit for service. Aval echav Kohanim lo ayu manichinoto la'avod ba'mikdash. His other Kohanim, his brethren, did not let him serve in the temple. Ad sheyeh ben esrim shana. They had the standard 20 years old. Could learn, but we saw also Levi different standards. But a Kohen, they would only let him work at the age of 20. I always wondered about this one. Is there a special outfit that Leviim wore? Rav Ariel and Rav Makover discussed this. They say it's implied in a few psukim that the Leviim had different uniforms and people knew they were Leviim. The Torah doesn't dictate. Perhaps it's something that changed from time to time. Certain generations, Leviim had a very specific form of dress or a uniform, and sometimes not. But what about a Kohen Gadol? We've seen that a Kohen has to have a short haircut. And we know that before the invention of shavers, micro cuttings, it was basically impossible for a Jew to be clean shaven unless he had a good depilatory. Correct? What's a depilatory? Chemical. Well, it doesn't have to be a cream. It's a chemical means of removing the hair, which is, by the way, not forbidden according to the Torah. Was there a standard that of beard hair or facial hair that a Kohen had to have? I don't know. I've never seen such a thing. According to those who permit a Kohen, let's say, or let's say a regular Jew, to use the usual shaving devices that are common, because a lot of rabbis do, especially in America, where they used to say, like the yeshiva which I attended, they had a rule you had to be clean shaven, and there have been some prominent rabbis of the last generations who are clean shaven, and it's not a new thing. Of course, there are many who say that really you shouldn't. Anyways, it's just as bad as shaving with a razor. I think Rabbi Bar-Hayim says that. I'm not supposed to do that. But is there a standard of a Kohen? Or let's say he happens to be 20, but he's not a guy who's reached 20 years old. He's not the most facially hairy guy. Would they let him serve in the temple? It's not a mum. We're going to see there's different mumim of a Kohen. If he has a certain baldness in certain ways, that would disqualify him. But we never saw anything about the beard. Well,
without any kind of facial hair, are they even allowed to do
yes, apparently. Doesn't say. Remember, the standard to be an ish, he just has to be an ish, which means 13, and by the way, have pubic hair, which we assume he has.
Oh,
okay?
I see, because I was thinking there's a halakha that they're not supposed to do it unless they
Okay, that's the standard of bar mitzvah. To be an ish, a person has to be 13 years in one day, and also for women, every adult in halacha has to have pubic hair. Some, like 2, at least. But that's much easier to acquire. That just happens. So happens that, let's say, human males, their beard comes in a little bit later. It's time delayed. And you even have some people like Rabbi Yochanan, it just never really gets to a lot. Okay, maybe it's a good thing, But I've never seen standards of facial hair. There's 2 things I would have a havamina, but I haven't seen it. That a Kohen should at least have natural growing hair. If he doesn't his beard never comes in, or is very weak, maybe he's disqualified. Or lehefich, let's say he can grow hair. The only question is he cuts it too short. He shaves his face on a regular basis. He's a regular 1950s Jew. Okay, when in the 1950s, even the rabbis didn't have beards, right? So would he be allowed to serve in the temple? Apparently, someone has to enlighten me also. I've never seen anything about standards of facial hair in the temple. Perhaps the Sanhedrin, perhaps the Beit Din of Kohanim will create a standard. I don't know. Okay. Aval, he said he only let him serve at the age of 20. He can only go his first time has to be when the Levim are singing. What does that mean exactly? Well, it doesn't mean like when they're just opening up the gates. The Levim sing at, let's say, on a regular day. When do the Levim start singing? When they offer the libation with the daily offering. That's a little bit later on in the service. So we have to wait for that point. Every Kohen's initiation, what's called chinuch, or inauguration, or induction, so that's what a minchat chinuch is. This is the grain offering, the meal offering of initiation. So to become a Kohen, he should first offer this meal offering, and when he's promoted to Kohen Gadol, he also has to offer this. Even if he offered it when he became a regular Kohen, now that he's been promoted, he offers it again. Shnamar zeh korban aron v'nav asher kriv l'Hashem b'yom mashachoto. This is the korban of Aaron, Kohen Gadol, and his children, regular Kohanim, which they should bring to God the day that they are anointed. They go into the service. Before, if he served, before he offered this minchat chinuch, which is a tenth of an ephah of flour. Let's say we walked right into the job. He didn't get a chance to bring the minchat chinuch. Who would this apply to? Once again, the classic case on Yom Kippur. We need an emergency backup. He's Kohen Gadol. They're in the middle of some other service. He can't take the time now to bring this minchat chinuch. Avodatan kshira. So after the fact, their service is still qualified. It has not been disqualified. You're surprised by this halacha? L'chad chila, a kohen who first serves, or a kohen gadol who becomes kohen gadol, should offer the minchat chinuch, but b'diavad, it's okay. Well,
What did we say about
if he didn't have the big day kuna gedolah, so he is invalidated the service.
So why is that different than this?
Because this is bigadim, it's a different halacha. It says he's supposed to bring.
Just a different zera.
Yeah, the Xeris HaKasav is that when a Kohen gets first time in the service, he has to bring a minchat chinuch. Could someone just flick the switch so that the timer in there is off or disconnected entirely?
In other words, doesn't make him a Kohen?
He's always a Kohen. He just has a mitzvah that if it's first day on the job, as either a regular Kohen or a Kohen Gadol, he should bring this minchat chinuch. So it should go first, l'chad chila. But if it didn't, so it didn't. Interesting halacha. You know that the Kohen Gadol brings a minchat chinuch on the first day, but then every day of his life after that, he has to bring a similar offering. It's called chavitei Kohen Gadol. You heard about this? We're going to get to chavitei Kohen Gadol. It's mentioned here in this halacha. Kohen shelo avad adayin miyamav. Kohen, for whatever reason, never actually served in the temple. 30 years old, finally makes it to, he finally left California, or he left Baltimore, and he's made it back to the base of HaMikdash, and he's going to be able to serve today at the age of 35. Minuoto Kohen Gadol. And not only that, he has been appointed Kohen Gadol today. He has never served one day in the temple, and now he's already Kohen Gadol. Hareza mivi asiri taifa, v'ovdab yado techila. First, he brings one minchat chinuch and does it himself. Kishar chinuch kol kohen edyot, just like the induction of every other ordinary kohen. V'achar kach makriv asiri doifa shniya. He brings yet another asiri doifa, another minchat chinuch, shei chinuch kohen gadol, which is the initiation into the high priesthood. V'achar kach makriv asiri doifa shlishith, a third minchat chinuch, a third tenth of an ephah. Shehi chavitei Kohen Gadol shemakriv b'chol yom k'moshet bayer, which is the ordinary sacrifice, the meal offering that every Kohen Gadol has to offer every single day out of his own pocket. Okay, that's called chavitei Kohen Gadol, as we'll explain. Here's interesting: u'maaseh shloshtan shavehu. The actual performance of all these meal offerings it's identical, all three, identical to each other. So they all look the same. It's like the olah. If you bring a lamb as an olah, its service is specific. There's an exact process where it has to be slaughtered. That happens to be that the tmidim of the morning and afternoon are a regular lamb olah. That any person would bring a lamb as an olah, as a burnt offering, would do it exactly like the tamid is done, because tamid is just a type of olah. And the kites of Mizbeach and the 2 extra lambs on Sabbath, or the 7 lambs of Rosh Chodesh, would also be the exact same. It would look the same way. So I guess, when they take out a Sefer Torah from the Aron, it's 3 Torahs today. We're going to read 3 readings. It's Shabbos, Hanukkah, and Rosh Chodesh. So they're going to take out 3 Torahs. So to differentiate the Torahs, what do, they hang a plaque on each Torah, Sefer Rishon, or Sefer Aleph, Sefer Bet, Sefer Gimel, right? So they used to, I would imagine that they have this way to distinguish when they bring out a lamb for whatever reason. Let's say the Ma'amad, the Jews who we're about to read about here, the ones who attend the temple service. So how are they supposed to know? Is this the morning lamb? What if it's part of a musaf? What if it's just some private individual's lamb burnt offering? How do they know which one it is from the outset? And the answer is probably some indication what it's supposed to be. So too, the meal offerings that the Kohen Gadol brings, they would know which one's the Chavitei Kohen Gadol, which one's a regular Minchat Chinuch, but they all look basically the same. Okay?
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.